The blizzard had swallowed everything. Fences vanished. Trees bowed low under the weight of white silence. The sky pressed close, gray and heavy, like it didn't want to let go. Clara Whitmore had just finished nailing, shut the last of the shutters when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not ice breaking loose from the roof, not the old barn groaning in protest. A cry, faint, high-pitched, human. She froze, breath clouding in front of her lips. Then she heard it again, closer this time, fragile, desperate, like a heartbeat breaking through the storm. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing her coat, she pushed through the front door and into the whiteout. The wind clawing at her like it had a grudge to settle. She moved by instinct, not sight, her boots crunching over ice and memory. 10 steps past the paddock, she nearly tripped. Something was there, half buried in snow, wrapped in a faded red cloth. The bundle moved, let out another soft, hoarse wail. Clara fell to her knees. It was a baby, barely breathing, skin cold as stone, a shallow cut on the forehead, frozen blood dried dark. The fabric wrapped around it bore patterns she recognized, Comanche symbols, handmade, sacred. Her hands moved before her mind caught up. She lifted the baby, held it against her chest, and ran. 3 days later, a shadow appeared on the ridge. Not alone. 100 warriors rode behind him, and Clara Whitmore was standing on the porch, with the baby still in her arms. The storm didn't break for another 12 hours, and neither did Clara. She sat through the night with the baby in her arms, rocking gently by the fire in a chair that had once belonged to her mother. She didn't sleep, didn't eat. Her body moved on instinct, the way her hands adjusted the blanket, the way she kept 2 fingers on the child's wrist to monitor the fading pulse. The fever came fast. It shimmered on the baby's skin like heat trying to fight through ice. She pressed cool cloths to the tiny forehead, whispered nonsense in a voice she hadn't used in years. The fire roared, dried her lips, made the walls sweat, but she didn't move. At first light, the child stirred. A weak cry, no stronger than a creak in old wood. But it was something. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her arms ached, her back screamed, but she kept rocking. And then the knocking began, not at the door, in her head. "What have you done?" By midday, the snow had softened to a dull, slushy quiet. The world outside looked like it had survived a war. Fences buried, trees broken, the windmill at the edge of the field leaning drunkenly westward. Clara changed the baby's wrapping. She did it slow, careful, eyes tracking every bruise and cut. The child, no more than 8 months old, had a gash on his temple and several small abrasions along his arm. But what made her heart freeze wasn't the wounds. It was the necklace, a small carved bone on a leather cord, symbolic, protective, and undeniably Comanche. She had lived near the Comanche territories all her life. Her late husband had traded horses with them before the war turned good intentions into suspicion. She remembered the signs, remembered the warnings. This child was a chieftain's son, or worse, a warrior's only blood. She bundled him tighter and stared out the window. No one had seen her bring him in. Yet, that afternoon she heard the hooves. Not many, just one horse. She moved the baby into the bedroom, tucked him beneath a wool quilt, and pressed a hand over his tiny chest until she felt breath. Then she stepped onto the porch. The rider was familiar. Eustace Carter, her nearest neighbor. 50 acres east and 3 drinks into madness on any given day. He stopped short when he saw her. "Clara," he said, voice sharp. "You all right?" "Thought maybe the roof caved in." "I'm fine." "You sure?" "Fella in town said he saw tracks near your place. Fresh ones. Right before the storm hit." Clara's jaw tensed. "Maybe just my own." Eustace sniffed, eyes narrowing. "You see any strangers out here?" "Just snow." He gave a slow nod. "Well, you be careful. Word is a hunting party went missing last week. Comanche. Some say they were near the ridge. I'll keep my doors locked." "You do that." He didn't ride off immediately, just sat there a moment longer, squinting past her toward the cabin windows. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Finally, he turned his horse and rode back into the white. That night, the baby wouldn't stop crying. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't cold. He was scared. She held him close, walking slow circles around the small room, whispering lullabies she hadn't thought of in years. Songs her mother used to hum. Songs that once made her own son stop fussing before he— She caught herself. Before nothing. Before memory tried to dig up the grave she'd spent 5 years covering with silence. The child's fingers curled around her shirt. She didn't pull away. On the second day, someone else came. This time it was Mary Finch, the pastor's wife. Tall, nosy, brittle as burnt sugar. She brought bread wrapped in cloth and concern wrapped in curiosity. Clara forced a smile. "Storm, break your fence?" Mary asked, glancing toward the fields. "Part of it. Any help needed?" "No. You've been quiet. I like it that way." Mary looked toward the window. "Anyone? Stop by?" Clara tilted her head. "You mean anyone like who?" Mary's smile sharpened. "Well, you'd know if they had." Clara didn't flinch. She took the bread, said thank you, and closed the door without another word. Behind her, the baby stirred in the next room, and outside the sky darkened, like it knew what tomorrow would bring. That night, Clara made a decision. She couldn't hide the baby forever, not with neighbors sniffing like hounds and snow melting into the kind of mud that held tracks longer than memory, but she also couldn't give him up. The child had clung to her finger earlier that evening, his tiny grip stronger than it should have been. His eyes, dark and wide, followed her as if he already understood something she hadn't said aloud. He was watching. He was learning who she was. And for the first time in 5 years, Clara felt like someone was depending on her again. She stayed up sharpening the kitchen knife, not because she expected violence, but because she knew it would find her if it wanted to. She moved the rifle from the mantel to the table, loaded it, checked it twice, and then she waited. The wind shifted after midnight. The baby slept in a basket lined with wool and faith, just beside the stove. Clara sat by the door, hand on the rifle, eyes on the snow. At some point she must have dozed, because she woke with a start to the sound of hoofbeats. 3 men, riders. Their outlines appeared like ghosts through the thin veil of pre-dawn mist. Not neighbors, not white men. They wore buffalo hides and paint across their cheeks. The horses didn't stomp or snort. They moved like shadows, intentional, focused. Clara didn't move, didn't reach for the rifle, didn't even breathe. One of them dismounted. He didn't approach the house. Instead, he walked slowly toward the chicken coop, knelt, and ran his hand through the snow. He was following something. Clara's heart sank. They know. But then he did something unexpected. He turned, looked directly at her window, and bowed his head once. Then he mounted again. The 3 men vanished the way they came, quietly, powerfully, like wind changing direction. She didn't tell the baby. She just picked him up, held him close, and whispered, "They know you're here, and they didn't take you. Yet." She wasn't sure if she was warning him or herself. The third day came without warning. It arrived like judgment. The baby was sleeping peacefully when the sound rolled over the ridge, distant at first, like thunder, then louder, clearer. Hooves, hundreds. Clara stepped out onto the porch. There, across the ridge, spilling like a black ribbon over the hills, was a sight no one had seen in 2 decades. Comanche warriors. 100, maybe more. Silent, armed, mounted with perfect posture and intent. At their head rode a man draped in a red cloak. Long braids, broad shoulders. A scar that traced his left jaw like lightning. He stopped 50 yards from her house and dismounted, alone. He walked the distance in measured steps, dust rising around his boots despite the wet ground. Clara stayed on the porch. The baby stirred in her arms. When the man reached the bottom of the steps, he looked up. Then he spoke. "You saved my son." Clara nodded once. "I did. He was left behind, not by mistake, by mercy. His mother died. The party was ambushed. We thought he had died too." "I heard him cry," she said softly. "You heard my blood scream, and you answered." There was silence. Then he asked, "Will you give him back to me?" She didn't answer at first. Then, "Will you take him from me if I say no?" He blinked once. "No." I wasn't trying to keep him, she said, voice low, but I wasn't ready to lose him either. You did not lose him. You brought him back. Clara looked down at the child. He doesn't even cry anymore when I hold him. The man nodded, then stepped forward, held out his hands. But instead of taking the baby, he simply touched the boy's foot, gently, reverently. He looked up at her again. You are now a part of his story. And what does that mean? He stood straighter. In our way, it means you are blood, and blood is never left behind. Then he turned to the ridge, raised a hand. One rider broke from the group, a woman, draped in blue, carrying something, a cradle board, the traditional way to carry Comanche infants, woven with leather, feathers, and protection symbols. But there was something else in the woman's hand, a necklace, the same as the baby's. The man took it, stepped back toward Clara. He didn't ask permission. He simply moved slowly, lifted the baby's necklace, and replaced it with the one in his hand. This one was newer, brighter, a sign. I give him a new name, he said, and I give you a new name too. She raised an eyebrow. What name? He looked her dead in the eye. Mother who hears. When the warriors rode away, Clara stood on the porch, still holding the baby. He would go with them in the morning. She knew that now, but for one more night, he was hers. And that somehow was enough. Clara didn't sleep that night. She tried. She stoked the fire, fed the baby warm milk, even laid her head beside him on the worn feather mattress. But sleep wouldn't come, because now that she knew the boy had a name, a father, a place to go, she realized she wasn't ready to let him leave. Not yet. At dawn, frost had crept over the windows, painting them in fine filigree like lace spun from ghosts. Clara rose quietly, wrapped the baby in a soft shawl she hadn't worn in years, and carried him to the porch. The land was still, no hooves on the wind, no warriors on the ridge, just silence, and the deep, aching weight of goodbye. She rocked him slowly, pressing her lips to the crown of his head. Little Hawk, she whispered, that's what I would have called you. The boy stirred in his sleep, brow twitching gently, like he was dreaming of someplace warmer, softer. And then from the tree line came the sound of hooves, but only one. The rider was the woman from the day before. No cloak, no feathers, just a rough wool shawl, a bundle of cloth, and quiet eyes like still water. She dismounted without a word and approached the steps. Clara rose, baby in arms, and met her gaze. His father? She asked. The woman shook her head. He waits. He does not wish to take him from your hands. That is not the way. Clara swallowed hard. I suppose I should say something. The woman tilted her head. He already heard you, when you stepped into snow to lift what death had left behind. Clara didn't speak, didn't move. Her arms didn't want to let go. So the woman stepped closer, gently, slowly, and reached out. But the baby cried. Not a wail, not distress, just a soft, half-waking murmur, as he twisted and buried his face in Clara's collarbone. She froze. So did the woman. And then Clara spoke. Can I see where he'll go? They rode together. Clara on her old mule, the baby bundled close against her chest. The woman rode beside her, not speaking, but not judging either. They crossed the creek, wound through the pines, climbed toward a rise that opened onto a small clearing. And there, beneath the rise, sat the encampment. Tents made of hide and wood, smoke curling from a fire pit, children running barefoot in the wet snow, dogs barking lazily in the sun. A village, a life. The warriors weren't all there anymore. Most had moved on, dispersed like storm clouds after a purpose passed. Only the red-cloaked man remained, seated by the fire. He rose as they approached. No weapons, no ceremony, just eyes fixed on the child. And something else, a tremble in his throat when the baby looked up at him. The woman dismounted first, moving to the fire. Clara remained still, the boy against her chest. Then slowly she got down and carried him the final steps herself. When she reached the father, she didn't speak. She just looked at him, long and steady, and whispered, You waited. I didn't know if you would. He took the child and nodded. I wait for what is mine, and I wait for what is sacred." The boy didn't cry. He simply looked up, as if he recognized something older than memory. The man held him with both arms, his fingers shaking slightly. Clara stepped back, but he stopped her, held out a hand, and in it, an object wrapped in cloth. She opened it. Inside was a carved medallion of bone and turquoise, a pendant worn by clan protectors, a symbol of guardianship. "He will know your name," the man said. "I already do," came a voice behind them. It was the woman. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. "In our tongue, we do not call you the white woman who saved him. We call you Natuanea, she who walks between worlds." Clara lowered her head. She didn't cry, not then, but she held the pendant tight in her palm, felt the shape of something she didn't yet understand, and whispered, "Then tell him, I didn't just save his life." She looked up. "He saved mine." That evening, Clara rode back alone. No baby in her arms, no sound but the wind in the trees, but the fire in her house never felt warmer, and the silence never felt less lonely. She placed the pendant above the mantel, where sunlight touched it each morning, and every Sunday she baked a loaf of sweet cornbread. She made two, one for herself, and one left on a flat stone by the creek. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the baby was carried away in his father's arms, since Clara stood in the clearing and watched the fire catch his cheeks like gold, since her house became silent again, but not empty. The baby's crib still stood by the stove. She hadn't moved it, didn't dust it either. She let it stay with the smell of ash and wool and milk, a quiet altar to something real, something warm, something lost and not lost. Each morning she walked to the creek, left her cornbread on the flat stone, didn't look back, didn't wait to see if it disappeared, but it always did. On the 15th day, the hooves returned. She knew the sound now, not thunder, not attack, just presence, purpose. She was sewing near the window when she heard them, slow, even hoofbeats, approaching not from the ridge, but from the woods near the back of her land. 3 riders, no weapons drawn, just silence. And then one rider dismounted, a woman, the same woman. Clara opened the door before the knock. The two stood in the threshold, the space between them charged with something that had grown too large for words. Then the woman spoke. "He was sick." Clara's heart turned, but the voice continued, steady. "A fever, from the wound. It came fast. We feared it would take him." Clara clutched the doorframe. "But he lived," the woman said. A pause, then, "He called for you." Clara blinked. "What?" "He said nothing. He has no words yet, but he cried when we took the red shawl from him, the one you wrapped him in." Clara looked down. Her hands were trembling. "He knew your smell," the woman continued. "And his father said, a child should never have to choose between one love and another." The silence between them felt like prayer. Then the woman reached into her saddlebag and pulled something out. A bundle. Software breathing. The baby, wrapped again in the red shawl. Clara stepped back, hand to her mouth. "He is not here to stay," the woman said gently, "but he is here to be loved." She placed the baby into Clara's arms, and the child smiled. Not just gurgled, not just blinked. Smiled. Clara sank to her knees, held him like fire in her arms, and whispered through a cracked voice, "You came home." That evening, the Comanche camp was made just beyond her land. Not in secret, not in challenge. Just there. A respectful distance. 3 small tents, a fire, and nothing else. Clara walked over as the stars began to rise. She brought stew and warm water and a storybook in English, even though none of them read it. Just to be near them. Just to say, without saying, "You can stay." In the morning, the warriors packed up. No one spoke of leaving. No one cried. Clara handed the baby to his father again, but this time her arms didn't ache with loss. She placed a new shawl around him, one she made herself, in silence, with care. Embroidered on the corner, a small symbol, a bird flying through snow. The father saw it and nodded. "This means," he said, "he now has 2 winters, one in my blood, one in yours." She watched them ride off. The child looking over his father's shoulder, eyes wide, hand reaching toward her once. Just once. And then they were gone. Weeks passed, then months, then spring. The creek thawed, the crops took root, and Clara lived. Not waiting, not mourning, just living. Each Sunday she still baked 2 loaves of cornbread. Sometimes they both stayed on the shelf. Sometimes one was gone by morning. But one day, one ordinary brilliant day, a ribbon arrived, tied around the door handle. Red, frayed at the ends. Attached to it, a tiny, crudely carved piece of wood, a bird, with snow beneath its wings. Spring didn't arrive gently. It scraped its way into the valley like a thief, slow, muddy, uninvited. The snow didn't melt so much as collapse, turning the roads into sludge, the fields into thick brown soup. Clara's boots sank deeper every day, her skirts stained with the stubborn refusal of the season to fully surrender to warmth. But the worst was over. The baby was gone, but alive, and Clara was still here, but changed. She hadn't seen the warriors again, hadn't heard from the father, the woman, or any rider from that world beyond the ridge. But every morning she boiled water, made coffee, and laid her hand over the small cradle by the stove, as if warming it with memory. Sometimes she imagined she still felt a heartbeat in the quilt. One day while repairing the fence that split the north field, she spotted tracks. Fresh ones, not horses, not wagon wheels, boots, wide, deliberate, and far too close to the house for comfort. She followed them, not out of fear, but instinct. They looped behind the barn, past the well, then veered into the woods. There, tucked between 2 elms, she found something that made her breath catch. A fire pit, old coals, still warm, and beside it, a ribbon, red, frayed, tied in a perfect knot and nailed gently into the bark of a tree. No name, no symbol, just color. But that was enough. That evening, as she swept the floor of the cabin, she found herself humming. She didn't realize it until she caught herself. Dust clouding in the air, her fingers working the broom like a metronome. It wasn't a song from childhood, not something taught. It was the melody she had rocked the child to, the one she invented one snow-heavy night, when he couldn't sleep and neither could she, and now it came back to her. Note by note, her lullaby to a borrowed son. The next day someone knocked. It wasn't Comanche. It wasn't a neighbor either. It was a woman, mid-30s, apron tied tight, eyes swollen from crying. "My sister said, you helped deliver a baby near Pinto Crossing," she said. Clara nodded. "I did. My cousin's in labor. It's gone wrong. They sent someone for the doctor, but I don't think he'll make it in time." Clara didn't hesitate. She packed warm water, herbs, cloth, then her hands. The baby was breech, the mother already near faint from pain. Clara worked in silence. She didn't panic, didn't flinch. Her voice calm, her movements confident. She turned the infant with 2 fingers, and a prayer whispered in a language she barely remembered. The child emerged red and screaming. The mother wept. The grandmother collapsed in relief. The cousin crossed herself. And Clara, she stood still, blood on her apron, a quiet fire in her eyes. No one thanked her. But when she turned to leave, they pressed a small basket into her hands. Inside, eggs, potatoes, bread, and beneath it all, a tiny knitted cap. She kept that last part, folded it into the chest at the foot of her bed, next to the Comanche medallion. Weeks passed. Life crept back into the valley. So did stories. Some whispered she was a healer. Some said she was touched by spirits. Some feared her. Some respected her. But no one ignored her. Then one morning she returned from the creek to find hoofprints in her yard. Dozens. No sound. No riders. Just impressions in the mud. And beneath the windowsill, a moccasin. Tiny, embroidered in white and gold. Tucked inside it, a strip of tanned hide. A message written in English, uneven but clear. "He speaks your name now." Clara held the note like a relic. Her fingers shook, not with fear, but awe. She didn't know what to do with joy that came so quietly. So she did what she always did when silence felt too big. She baked 2 loaves, one for the table, one for the creek stone. She added honey this time. That Sunday, she dressed in her old lace blouse, tied her hair up, rode into town for the first time in 4 months. The town fell quiet when she tied her mule to the post outside the general store. She stepped inside, picked up a spool of twine, a jar of preserves, and a tin of coffee. No one spoke until she reached the counter. Edna Marsh, the storekeep's wife, cleared her throat. "You still seeing Indians?" Clara placed the tin on the counter. "I don't see races," she said. "I see people." "That's not what the town council says." Clara leaned forward. "Then maybe they should stop looking through fear and start looking through fire." No one said anything after that. Edna rang up the sale in silence, and Clara left with her head held higher than it had been in years. That night, a bundle was left at her door. Inside, a single drawing, charcoal on animal hide, a child, chubby-faced, smiling, held between 2 women, one with braids, one with a familiar red shawl. Summer came early. The rains held off. The crops rose fast. The valley dried into golden stretches of wheat and dust, and the sky went quiet the way it does when something important is about to happen. Clara felt it, in her bones, in the way the wind pressed against the house at night, not howling, not begging, just asking. The next message didn't come by rider or carving or gift. It came in a story, told over tea by an old widow named Harriet Flynn, who wandered the hills near the southern ridge. "I saw a line of them," she whispered, eyes wide. "Comanche, at least 30, painted, moving through the tall grass like ghosts." "When?" Clara asked. "3 nights ago." "Where?" "Toward Widow's Hollow." Clara felt her stomach drop. That hollow, tucked between the split peaks of the limestone cliffs, was sacred ground to the Comanche. She had never been there, but the baby had come from that direction in the storm, and something in her heart told her, go back. She left at sunrise, didn't tell anyone, didn't leave a note. She packed water, a knife, a small mirror, and a scrap of red cloth. No food. She didn't expect to eat. She wasn't going as a guest. She was going as someone summoned. The trail twisted through burned scrub and brittle trees. The closer she got to the cliffs, the more the wind changed, carrying the smell of sage and sun-warm rock, dry and ancient. By mid-afternoon, she reached the ridge. She tied her mule to a cedar, walked the last half-mile on foot, and then she saw them. Tents, hide-covered, painted with animal shapes, moons, and rivers. Children playing with sticks, a fire in the center, warriors sharpening blades, women plaiting rope, but no one raised a weapon. No one called her out. They just watched, because they knew her, and she knew herself. She stepped into the camp, didn't wait to be invited. She didn't need to, because from the largest tent, a voice called, "Natu Ane." He stepped out slowly, the father, the war chief, his red cloak replaced by a linen tunic, his hair braided with bone beads. In his arms, the boy, not a baby now, a toddler, healthy, round-cheeked, black eyes bright with recognition. When he saw her, he leaned forward and flailed his arms. "Ma!" The camp went silent, not in shame, not in awe, just in recognition, as if a prophecy had fulfilled itself in the voice of a child who hadn't known how to speak until that very moment. Clara froze, then walked forward. The chief handed her the child. No words, no ritual, just trust. She held him. He leaned against her chest, and she cried, for the first time, not in grief, but in completion. That night they danced, not Clara. She sat by the fire, the boy asleep on her lap. But the women moved like wind, like water, like breath, their feet stirring dust in perfect rhythm, their hands drawing stories from air. The fire didn't roar, it pulsed, like a heartbeat. One woman leaned over and placed something beside Clara. A piece of deer hide, painted with 3 symbols, a cradle, a fire, and 2 birds flying beside each other. She looked up. The woman smiled and said, "We do not burn what the wind delivers." Clara didn't understand, not until morning. She woke to find the boy gone. Her heart kicked against her ribs, but only once. Then she heard his laughter and followed the sound to a place just beyond the camp. He was with the chief and a small group of young warriors. They were showing him how to ride, not a real horse, a stick. But the boy shrieked with joy each time they galloped in circles, his arms wide like wings. The chief looked at Clara and said, "We are not here for war." She nodded. "I know," he continued. "Some wanted it. After the storm, after they saw a woman take a blood child, there were voices that said, 'Burn her.' And I said no." "Why?" He smiled. "No warrior sets fire to the place his son was reborn." Before she left, the chief handed her a pouch. Inside, seeds. "Wild tobacco," he said. "Mix it with your garden. It will remind him of both homes." Clara placed it in her pack. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. When she turned to leave, the boy cried once. Reached for her, but the father held him steady. "Your mother," he said softly in Comanche, "is in the wind, not the fire." And the boy quieted. She walked the whole way home. Didn't look back, didn't ride, because some journeys are only complete when your feet touch every stone of the road. That evening she stood at her garden gate, pulled the pouch from her pocket, and scattered the seeds into the soil with care. A ritual, a planting, a promise. Autumn arrived like an old friend. No fanfare, just a shift in the light, the way the shadows leaned longer on the dirt road, how the apples grew heavier on the trees, how the crows grew louder in the early mornings. Clara moved slower now, not because she was tired, but because she had learned that nothing worth holding ever rushed toward you. And still, the boy didn't return. Not physically, not with footsteps or pony hooves or the whisper of feathers on the wind, but he was everywhere. His shawl still hung near the stove, the one she'd sewn with crooked stitches, red as desert stone. His drawing, charcoal on hide, was pinned above the mantel. She'd carved his name into the windowsill, just small enough not to be noticed, but deep enough never to be erased. Some days she'd wake and swear she heard him crying. Other days she dreamed of him laughing. But mostly he lived in the in-between. A giggle on the breeze, a feather on the step, a single moccasin left near the well. The valley quieted, the town forgot. They called her Miss Whitmore again. They stopped asking about the Comanche, stopped whispering in stores. She wasn't news anymore. She was just there. But she didn't mind, because the ones who mattered still remembered. Then one November morning she found a letter, pressed between the doorframe and the post, held there by a carved stone. The handwriting was rough, not Comanche, not local, just learning. Inside were 5 words. "I miss you, Mom." Clara held the letter for a long time, then placed it inside the pocket of her dress. Didn't cry, didn't smile, just stood there like a woman rooted to 2 lives, stitched at the edge of 2 worlds. Weeks passed, and then one morning while baking, she heard the knock. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't loud, just certain. She opened the door and froze, because there he was, the boy, not in arms this time, not swaddled, standing, barefoot, hair braided, cheeks full, taller than she remembered, holding the hand of the woman in blue, the one who had first brought him back. He said nothing, just walked forward, placed both his tiny hands on Clara's skirt, and looked up. "Ma?" Clara dropped to her knees, held him tight, and whispered, "I hoped you'd come back standing." He laughed. "I came running. I just walked the last part." They stayed 3 nights. The boy slept in his old cradle the first night, then asked to sleep on the floor beside her bed the next. Clara let him. The woman brought herbs, stories, a woven pouch of dried meat and fruit. They shared no firelit ceremony, no grand reunion, just long silences filled with warmth. On the second night, as they shelled peas by candlelight, the boy sat in her lap and asked, "Did I come from your belly?" Clara stilled. The woman looked down. Clara considered lying, then she placed her hand over his heart. "Number, you didn't come from here," she said softly, "but from here." She tapped her chest. The boy nodded, like he already knew. Then that means I have two hearts, he said, and she pulled him closer. Yes, and two homes. When they left, the woman didn't say where they were going. Clara didn't ask. The boy turned once from his pony, grinned wide, and held up a stone, a feather carved into it. He threw it to her gently. She caught it midair. He said, I'll bring you more. Then they rode, not away, just onward. That winter, Clara planted the seeds. The tobacco grew fast. She mixed it with lavender, let it dry, then burned small bundles at dusk. She didn't pray. She didn't speak. She just let the smoke curl through the rafters like a reminder. In spring, she rode south, near the creek, found a new stone tucked in the same place she used to leave cornbread. Carved in it, a bird in flight. This one had her eyes. Clara never married again, never left the valley. But when she died, many years later, she wasn't buried in the churchyard. She was laid to rest in a circle of stones beneath the pine trees near the creek, and on her grave, a single word was carved into the wood. Ma. Now it's your turn. If you were the child Clara found that night, crying in the snow, could you walk away from the arms that kept you warm when the world turned cold? Think about it. If a stranger saved your life, what would you call them? If a child belonged to two worlds, one of blood and one of choice, which one would feel like home? And tell me this, is a mother born through bloodlines or through the quiet way she holds you when no one else will? Leave your thoughts below, because the wind will carry us to another story soon. But for now, we've stood in Clara's valley, and out there, beneath pine and memory, one word still echoes: Magister.